Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rev Left. All right, so today I got to get something out. Obviously, anybody paying attention to anything happening in the world knows that we're in day 3 or 4 of a brand new war. So this is a new war between, this is a officially declared war and everything as far as I understand, a war between the genocidal, apartheid, settler, colonial, fascist state of Israel and the occupied, oppressed, colonized Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza, but of course these things never stay contained to one area. But right now, what Israel is doing is bombarding Gaza, murdering children, slaughtering entire families, basically in this open-air prison. And the reason we call it an open-air prison is because it literally is. Google image search the wall around Gaza if you haven't already. Right? This is a war that even puts the Trump's wall on the southern border to shame as far as its intensity, its height, its hostility to human flesh, etc. So, it's just going over the basic facts. Gaza's 2.2 million human beings. In Gaza, 50% of whom are under the age of 18, 40% of whom are under the age of 15. We have, again, 2.2 million people smashed into a tiny, tiny little area. I think it's the second or third most dense human population center on the fucking face of the earth, rivaled only by incredibly dense cities like Tokyo, for example. So this is a lot of people imprisoned, literally imprisoned with walls in a tiny, tiny area in which up to 97% of the water is not safe for drinking. You have unemployment rates in the 50 percentile range, poverty rates in the 60 percentile range. You have decades and decades of bombings by Israel. Israel, of course, dictates what comes in and what goes out of Gaza. So, something as simple as concrete, for example, in the 16-year embargo that is currently in place, cannot easily get in. So you can't even rebuild after these various squabbles and these, pummelings by Israel onto Gaza. And now Israel, this fascist genocidal state, has declared that they're turning off the water. They're stopping all entrance of food into Gaza, no electricity, no fuel, basic necessities for human life. And the one of the defense minister or one of the generals, I don't know exactly, has called the people of Gaza animals, and that we are going to treat them as such. And everything since then has been exactly that. Indiscriminate bombing by Israel of apartment buildings in Gaza, of refugee camps in Gaza, of literally ambulance vehicles being bombed. As usual, Israel doesn't give a fuck. They use this excuse that Hamas can be anywhere, and they bomb hospitals, they bomb schools. Again, a refugee camp should be a place where, non-combatants, largely women and children, can go to seek refuge in Gaza because they can't fucking leave. And that has been bombed by these fucking disgusting fascists, settler, colonial, genocidal maniacs in Israel. Now, I can't get into everything today. There's so much to cover. And I've re-released on the Rev Left public feed multiple episodes that we've done in the past on Red Menace and Rev Left that help people understand this situation. One of them was a detailed 2-hour episode Allison and I did covering the entire history of the Israel versus Palestine sort of conflict and giving you a bunch of arguments and ammunition for how you go about understanding the conflict and reacting to it. One of the things that happens in a situation like this is that for many people that are ignorant of the deeper, very complex issue of Israel versus Palestine, is when the media picks up on the shit, it acts like this is happening in a vacuum. So, whenever there's a skirmish, whenever there's conflict, whenever the bombs start flying, then it busts into the American and Western media headlines, and then what is basically treated as if there's no history here, right? That this conflict just started. So how is this recent conflict framed by the U.S. media? Well, very simply, Hamas invaded Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself and fight back. So I'm literally talking to apolitical people or liberals in my family who, just understand this conflict as starting 3 days ago when, for no reason, out of the blue, these Hamas terrorists storm into Israel and start slaughtering people, right? That's literally how it's presented, as if this has not been a continuing war with acute moments of high intensity and then lulls and then acute moments of high intensity for decades and decades and decades since the founding of Israel, which of course was founded in the displacement of Palestinians, in the slaughter of Palestinians. This is a war that has never ended, right? And so one of the most frustrating things is seeing this stuff presented to a largely ignorant American population as if it just happens in a vacuum, totally and utterly disconnected from the previous history in a very similar way as the Russian-Ukraine war is completely disassociated from any history and is just seen as a singular event, as if 2014, the Maidan coup, didn't happen, as if Ukraine military Nazi forces weren't slaughtering and attacking and having a war in the eastern regions of Ukraine that are more Russian-speaking, Russian ethnic enclaves within Ukraine, which and as if NATO's expansion had nothing to do with it. I was listening to Barry Weiss's Honestly the other day, obviously a hardcore, disgusting fucking Zionist, and she literally explicitly, and I posted this on our brand new Instagram account if anybody's interested, Rev Left Official, Rev Left Radio Official. She posted, or she did a whole episode, and she explicitly said, this has nothing to do with occupation. This has nothing to do with colonization. What Hamas did, these terrorists that attacked innocent Israeli civilians, it's so disgusting to bring up all the historical context. And she made the analogy. It would be like if after 9/11, we started talking about the U.S.'s policy in the Middle East. She's like, it has nothing to do with the carnage. Literal words from her. That has nothing to do with the carnage. What in the fuck are you talking about? How could you be a serious thinker, somebody that claims to understand the history here, and try to obscure the fact that this history is directly related, is a direct product. What's happening now is a direct product of this history. But that's what being a Zionist entails. It requires you, the ideology of Zionism requires you to lie, to be a deceiver, to be a half-truth teller, right? It requires you to obscure and muddy information in the truth, to whitewash history. It requires that of you, which is why every hardcore Zionist you meet is the most disingenuous motherfucker you've ever laid eyes on. This is why you can't have a reasonable argument with these hardcore Zionists, because they live in a fantasy fucking land and they refuse to grapple with the real situation. But today, and I'm working in the background to see if we can get an actual expert on, a Palestinian on, to talk about what's happening. This is an ongoing, evolving situation, as we know. But I was very motivated to come here and at least address some certain points. Now, I want to make it clear again, we have a full backlog. I just re-released our 3-episode series on Fanon, if you want to understand anti-colonial theory. I released our episode with Red Menace. We did detailing the entire history of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the U.S.'s role in it, what settler colonialism means in Israel, etc. You can go check that out on the public feed. I re-released our From the River to the Sea Palestinian Liberation Movement episode from a few years back as well, so people can get more historical details from a Palestinian perspective on that issue as well. And I think we released a couple other episodes relating to anti-colonial and decolonial theory, which is, of course, utterly essential to understand in this moment. And again, I'm working in the background to see if we can get an expert on to have a full-throated public Rev Left episode, a new one, talking about the new events that are happening. But I wanted to come on and provide some ammunition to people who are in the West, are being drowned out by this insane media apparatus, which does the bidding of the U.S. and Israel imperial colonial rule, which tells and highlights only the perspective of the Israelis. Now, I've seen some instances in which, they'll have a Palestinian on, like I think CNN, Fareed Zakaria. I listened to his full episode recently, and he had on 2 Israeli perspectives, one in the beginning and one at the end, and then sandwiched in between was one Palestinian voice, which, okay, fine, I'll give props to it because it's better than not doing that at all. I watched entire segments on ABC and CNN where only the Zionist line was promoted. Nothing, even attempting to see things from the Palestinian perspective. And I saw this motherfucker. It's insane. You feel gaslit watching this shit. You feel like you're fucking going insane watching some of this stuff. But I watched, I can't remember if it's on ABC, CNN, one of these mainstream news channels. Somebody come on representing this idea that this person is indigenous to Palestine, right? A Zionist. The whole argument rests that this is really our land. As white as you can get, with a Californian American complete dialect, almost Valley Girl-ish dialect, talking about this conflict as if, she's this indigenous person to this area and giving the full-throated Zionist bullshit narrative. And it just drives you fucking insane watching this. This white person with a full-on American dialect is indigenous to the Levant. Shut the fuck up. It is a joke on top of a joke. But again, to be a Zionist is to reify lying and deceiving and half-truthing into an ideology in and of itself. And also, what this shows so fucking perfectly, the ideology of settler colonialism is fascist. European fascism arose out of European colonialism, right? We all know these lines about, the chickens coming home to roost with regards to like the Holocaust being Europeans doing to other Europeans what they've historically done to people in the global South. Another interesting point to point out is this entire conflict is in so many ways Palestinians having to pay the price for European anti-Semitism. Right? It was the Germans who did the Holocaust. It was 1,000 years of pogroms throughout Europe that where anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories arose and flourished for thousands of years, culminating, of course, in the attempted Nazi Holocaust of Jewish people. And coming out of that Holocaust, you can totally sympathize with the idea that given that Jewish people have no real nation state to defend themselves against other nation states, that in a vacuum there's an argument for, hey, we need a military, we need to defend ourselves, pogrom after pogrom resulting in the fucking disgusting Holocaust. We need to be able to defend ourselves. Fine, but you don't get to go do it to other people in the name of protecting yourself from it happening. You don't get to turn around and become the fascists. You don't get to go and say where people have been living for 1,000+ years, they're going to be forcefully and violently displaced so that you can have your nation state. And that is one of the sick historical ironies of what we see here, is coming out of the tragedy and the horror of the piece of shit Nazi Holocaust. Fuck every Nazi, fuck every anti-Semite, right? Disgusting what happened to Jewish people during that Holocaust and before. You sympathize with it. But then they turn around and in a figure like Netanyahu, this is brought to extreme fucking clarity and contrast. They become the fascists, right? What Netanyahu is a sort of inverted Nazi. The way he talks, the way he dehumanizes, the way his cabinet of far-right fascist fucking freaks talk in terms of genocide and slaughter, what they actually do to people, is modern-day Nazism. And it's insane, historically, deeply ironic, and tragic that out of the horrors of the Holocaust come the horrors of settler colonial Israel and what it does to innocent Palestinians. How many videos of dead babies do we have to fucking see before we take a stand on the side of humanity? Okay? So those are opening thoughts. I'm amped up. I'm not going to be able to tie every little line of extemporaneous argumentation into a nice little bow, but I'm going to do my best. And what I'm going to do here is not have a super long episode, but I want to cover a couple main talking points that you hear, because what we are going through right now is a war of information, an info war, if you will. And it's incredibly interesting because we do have social, this old saying, the revolution will not be televised. Well, the internet and social media have abolished that. There is no more foundation for that cliche to ever be uttered again, because we see now with that comes a bunch of misinformation, fake videos, old videos. Wading through this shit, just like at the beginning of Russia and Ukraine, the ghost of Kiev, all this dumb shit certainly pops up and is hard to wade through. But with the internet and social media, we can fight back. We have our narratives. We can come together and have each other's backs. We can talk shit to powerful people who've never had people talk shit to them. We can correct the record. We can point out when things are false. We can share our own videos, our own narratives, which you'll almost never find in Western mainstream press, of the Palestinian carnage, on the receiving end of Israeli bombs. And we can really fight back. Now, the powers that be still try to control that. You see these insane lies like these Zionists online spreading these lies that these Palestinians are going around raping indiscriminately women with no evidence, no verification, but playing into age-old Islamophobic and racist tropes about brown hordes of rapists, of savages, of uncivilized people, carrying out barbarism on civilized people. It plays into these tropes very easily. Enough people say it gets amplified enough times. Naive people who don't understand the conflict can buy into that incredibly easily. And one of the things that's coming up, and this is one of the talking points I want to address here, is this wishy-washy bullshit fucking liberal attempt to say, hey, I support the Palestinians. I just don't support the main material force for their liberation, i.e. Hamas. Oh, you don't like Hamas, right? Oh, they're like ISIS. They're religious fanatics. They're terrorists. Who created Hamas? Why does Hamas exist? Hamas, whatever you feel about them, is a product of the Israeli occupation, and more than that, is a conscious product of Israel's government policy to create and embolden and bolster Hamas, a much less sympathetic movement given the religious extremities of its ideology, than the PLO or the PFLP or these other manifestations of Palestinian liberation, often having socialist or communist connotations to them, that were objectively heroic, who had genuine martyrs and leaders who connected to people outside and could really give the narrative, who had the complete moral, high ground on every issue. Of course, you want to displace those much more heroic movements with a much less sympathetic movement, especially in the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror, in which, you can label these religiously inclined groups terrorists straight up. And that word does so much work, terrorist. But here's the deal. Here's the fact. Not only is Hamas a creation of the Israeli occupation, not only is it a conscious creation, bolstering, funding, supporting, uplifting to the detriment of other, maybe slightly more, honorable ideologically movements. It's also, regardless of what you think about all that, the actually existing material force for Palestinian liberation, the actually existing material force that can take the fight to Israel out of Gaza. And there's no other force like that. So when you say, I don't support Hamas and I also don't support Israel, you're doing that liberal thing where you think that there's some third magical option out there somewhere. And that's not reality. That's idealism. That's the imposing of this third idea that could exist. There could be the perfect vehicle that met all your perfect little Western moral standards for decency that could exist here. But it fucking doesn't, because of a long and complex history and the conscious engineering on behalf of the Israeli government and policy to make sure those forces don't exist. And then when the leading edge, the material force for Palestinian liberation goes out and attempts in a heroic and profound fashion to fight back, to decolonize, to purge their land of the colonizers, they're called terrorists. And all the tropes around the post 9/11 war on terror come directly marshaled, come into play to demonize these people. You only hear one side of the story. You don't know where Hamas came from. You don't know their origins, right? And so words like terrorism, analogies to ISIS can be made very easily. And if you are not critically thinking and you are not informed, you will get bulldozed by this propaganda. And that's what happens time and time again. So if you don't fucking like Hamas, then you should want by every fucking inch of your soul to end the occupation, to end the apartheid state that gives rise to Hamas, to end the Israeli government, which consciously engineered Hamas. But in reality, in concrete material reality here and now, that is, for better or worse, the main leading material force of Palestinians' ability to fight back out of Gaza. Period. Okay? You don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to go into make your own player mode and craft some beautiful, perfect movement that meets your little standards as you sit comfortably in some fucking armchair in Europe or America in an air-conditioned room, never even having gotten a fist fight in your life, never so much as heard the sirens of war blaring outside your window, and say, these are my moral standards in order for me to support you. Fuck you. And moreover, the Palestinians, they don't need your fucking wishy-washy, liberal-ass bullshit support. They don't need to meet your fucking standards to liberate themselves from apartheid, from occupation, and from fucking genocide. And you have two options as a Palestinian in Gaza. Do you fucking sit there every day, day in, day out, and let Israel oppress you, strip you of your freedom, of your democracy, of your human fucking dignity every single day and die a slow, painful, passive death at the hands of your occupier? Or do you fight back, and if you die, at least you die on your fucking feet? At least you die fighting back. Every motherfucking conservative I've ever heard talk out of their ass, every asshole who drives his fucking F-350 from his suburban air-conditioned home to Chick-fil-A and back talks about the Second Amendment, the tree of liberty needing to be nourished with the blood of tyrants, every human's right to freedom and liberty, gargling up and vomiting out slogans from 1776. Right? Putting their little fucking stickers on the back of their huge ass $70,000 fucking trucks, pretending they're oppressed, inventing conspiracy theories to make themselves the victim when they're not. They're and then there's a real example of people rising up and standing up, fighting for their liberty, fighting for their democracy, fighting for their own representation, their own human dignity against the classic oppressor. And all of a sudden you're on the side of the oppressor. Everything you believe is bullshit because you don't believe shit. You don't believe in anything. Oh, another element of this fucking hypocrisy. The Ukraine war. Since it started, we've had it shoved down our fucking throats that Ukraine has every right to self-determination. They have every right to fight back against a bigger bullying power. Right? Now, that's all obfuscation and ideological mystification to support what that really is, which is a proxy war by the United States using Ukraine as their battering ram to militarily deplete Russia and its forces in order to make a future conflict, particularly with China, more easy to take on if you have a depleted Russian military force that has been bogged down in years of fighting, really using Ukrainians as fodder to just deplete the Russian military, even though there's no even belief on, really, if you get these people in a room and ask their honest opinion, there's no chance Ukraine's going to win, But America will fight to the last Ukrainian to deplete Russian military force. So that's what's really going on. But they can't say that. So they talk about democracy and freedom and self-determination, right? You're a Putin puppet. Why should Ukrainians not fight back? Blah, blah, blah. We've had to hear that jammed down our fucking throats since the beginning. And then here we have another example of, okay, let's see some moral consistency. Let's say you actually believe the bullshit you say about Ukraine. Let's say you actually believe people have a right to self-determination. Let's say you actually believe that you're fighting for democracy and freedom. Here are a people who in every objective sense are a occupied, oppressed, colonized, apartheid people who are forced into human indignity, are not given safe drinking water, are bombed at will with no fucking accountability, who have no democratic say in the political system that governs them. We did a whole war in the U.S. over taxation without representation. That was over taxation. The American colonists never felt even a fraction of the oppression that Palestinians face. And we went to war over it, and we still celebrate it 250 years later as some monumental victory for humanity. And didn't face a fraction of what Palestinian people face. But they're not allowed to revolt. Why? Because they're not white? Because they're not white? Is that why they're not allowed to fight? You believe in human decency and self-determination and democracy and freedom, but only for some people. Not everybody. It's not a universal claim. If you have a different skin color, a different language, if you're from the global south, you have a different religion. Those things don't extend to you. If you're a neo-fucking-Nazi in Ukraine, oh yeah, you have every right. Here, we'll give you billions of dollars. We'll give you every gun and tank we have on offer to go fight these dirty Russian orcs. Fucking disgusting. It tells the lie of this entire fucking, not only the U.S. empire, but the entire world order. The entire world order, shaped by U.S. imperialism, is coming apart at the seams because anybody with a fucking brain can see straight through the hypocrisy, straight through the cynicism, straight through the bullshit. And if you can't see that, I don't want to be mean. Crack open a fucking book, you idiot. Because if you are somebody that supports Ukraine and you support Israel, you're either a disgusting lying motherfucker with no moral consistency, or you're a media-programmed bot. A true life NPC that you get inserted opinions because where's the consistency? A second of critical thought. If you're a regular person who supports the Ukraine war and all your arguments about why Ukraine is justified, okay? A second of critical thought says, whoa, okay. If I really truly believe that stuff, do I really believe that stuff? Oh yeah, I really do. Okay, well here's another exact example where you can show with extreme clarity your moral consistency. Because you say you believe in self-determination. You say you hate oppression. You say nobody has the right to invade and occupy and step on the throat of another fucking people. You say you believe in freedom. You say you believe in democratic representation. You say you believe in human rights. And that's why we should support Ukraine. Okay, here's another example. All those things are in play. Everything you say you believe is right here on the side of the Palestinians. Oh, no. In this case, it's different. What's different? What's different? The political project at play. If you support both Ukraine and Israel, has nothing to do with moral consistency, has nothing to do with intellectual honesty. It has nothing to do with values or principles. It has everything to do with the Western world's interest, geopolitically, economically. It has everything to do with the dictates of empire. And it has everything to do with corporate mass media shoving opinions down your throat that you uncritically deep throat. That's what it has to do. And so that is one argument, this Hamas argument, this Ukraine argument. Another argument that you see a lot, and this is a clever one. Tying Zionism to Judaism. We hear it all the time. When it first broke out, I turned on CNN, I turned on ABC, I turned on MSNBC. I heard it 2 or 3 times. This line, an attack on Israel is an attack on all Jewish people. The fucking stupid-ass mayor of Toronto, who I ratioed, by the way, and she deleted her fucking tweet, gets on there, gets on Twitter and feigns concern for Jewish people in Toronto, framing this as some sort of global assault on Jewish people. Framing any criticism or attack on Israel in any way as a criticism and an attack of Jewish people, as synonymous with anti-Semitism. And what does this do? Well, one of the things it does is it very easily tricks naive liberals with the language of social justice and identity politics to shut the fuck up and back down. Because to be confident on this issue, and this issue in particular, all issues, but this one in particular, you have to be really well informed. This is a complex issue, not morally, but historically, factually. There's a long, long history here. Most human beings on this planet do not understand that history, do not know that history. And that makes people incredibly susceptible to this sort of manipulation. But let me be clear. It is deeply anti-Semitic to try and make all Jewish people synonymous with the state of Israel and to associate them by virtue of them being Jewish to its criminal behavior. Yet it's a major talking point in the West, and I've heard it advanced many times. Zionists are constantly trying to argue that criticism of Israel and attacks on Israel are synonymous with a generalized hatred of Jewish people, and it's a disgusting fucking lie. But again, it browbeats or tricks naive liberals into ideological submission because it uses the language of social justice and identity politics. The fact is, Israel has countless Jewish critics, and it literally always has from day one. And Israel is a settler colonial state. It is not and will never be an entire cultural, ethnic, and religious tradition spanning thousands of years. It is a state. It is not all of Judaism. Judaism exists, and Judaism flourishes beyond the conceptual or material confines of Zionism and the modern Israeli state. It always has and it always will. Anybody that tries to say that if you are not anti-Semitic, you must support a fascist, genocidal, murderous, psychotic settler colonial state is being anti-Semitic. It is tying Jewish people and the beautiful tradition of Judaism with the crimes of a fascist state. That is anti-Semitic. That is anti-Semitic. Not criticizing this state. Not attacking this state. Okay? So I want to make that incredibly clear. Do not let these motherfuckers frame it as anti-Semitism. I hate anti-Semitism. Anybody who's an anti-Semitism can get punched in the fucking mouth. You come up to me and say some racist shit, say some homophobic shit, say some anti-Semitic shit, say some Islamophobic shit, I will treat you like a fucking Nazi. I will feed you your own teeth. Okay? We do not stand for a second for any generalized hatred of Jewish people. But we will stand against every fucking step of the way the Zionist propaganda machine and the murderous Israeli state. And you will never, ever convince me or anybody with a brain that those two things, Judaism and Zionism, are the same thing. It is a disingenuous, disgusting, framing attempt to propagandize people into ideological submission and to deeply obscure the real dynamics of what's going on here. And this is decolonization. This is the quintessential case of decolonization. This is exactly like apartheid South Africa. What did the liberal West call Mandela and his movement before they brought down the apartheid state? They called them terrorists. They called them terrorists. And only after the victory in South Africa and the destruction of the apartheid state did the West accept Mandela as a hero. Not unlike Martin Luther King Jr., right? But the South Africa case is perfect because it's exactly an apartheid state. It's exactly a settler colonial state. It has exactly the same basic dynamics, racial, ethnic dynamics. And it has the exact same liberal condemnation of the freedom fighters, right, of the decolonizers, up until they win. And then guess what's going to happen? Every fucking liberal and progressive asshole out here, from Bernie Sanders to AOC to any other motherfucker that likes to trot around like they're progressive, when, and it will happen, the Zionist regime falls. When the apartheid state ends. When the territory's been decolonized. Liberals will say they were always on the right side. Liberals will glorify the resistance movement. Liberals will say, of course, Palestine has a right to fight back against occupation. Liberals will jump on the bandwagon. They're always late. They're always late. In the heat of the moment, they are against the forces of progress and liberation. Their racism comes out in full force, right? After the fact, these mealy-mouthed, spineless liberals, they pretend they were on the right side of history all along. Well, just like history has already, in my mind, absolved Castro and will continue to absolve him, history will absolve Palestine. It will be very clear in hindsight, when posterity looks back, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. It will be very, very clear. Just as it's very, very clear now, looking back, who are the good guys and bad guys in apartheid South Africa? Who are the good guys and bad guys in the Haitian Revolution? Who are the good guys and bad guys in the Algerian War for liberation against France? And that's another thing. I saw fucking Emmanuel Macron fucking tweet out, "We stand with Israel. This disgusting terrorist attacks." And I simply replied, we remember and we honor the Algerian revolutionary movement for liberation and decolonization. Of course, a criminal and colonial state like France will support another criminal and colonial state. And just like the Algerians rose the fuck up and kicked the French, their settler colonial French, out of their territory, the Palestinians are trying to do the same. Justin Trudeau, another leader of a disgusting settler colonial society, where they just, a year ago, discovered mass graves of indigenous people and children on Canadian territory, on Canadian soil. A guy who did fucking blackface, this fucking clown, bitch liberal. Justin Trudeau gets up there and says, we stand in full support with Israel. How dare these terrorists do anything like that? Of course, the blackface guy, leading another settler colony, will side with the white supremacist settler colony in the Levant. Of course, the French settler colonialists will team up with the Israeli settler colonialists. Of course, the American settler colonialists will team up with the Israeli settler colonialists. And there you go. Another example. A political debate we've had on the left recently with the rise of these movements, these PATSOC and MAGA communist movements that say decolonization is bullshit. Who cares about that? We're way past that. That's what that sort of blindness shows you. That the settler colonial nature of these nation states are constitutive of the sort of states that form on top of them and the ideology that forms with it. A lot of the right-wing ideologies that still haunt us today, white supremacy, private property, the settler colonial use of the gun and the fetishization of it, are forged in the settler colonial processes that created capitalism and these capitalist states. Now, the whole global South takes a very, very different approach, but you won't hear those perspectives. The perspective is of U.S. and Israeli hegemonic discourse. It's the ideological domination of those two powers that be, currently still in power, and thus have the ability to use their media apparatus to get out their ideas. Now, it's also an irony that I don't know how to pronounce it, Haaretz, a main newspaper in Israel, can take a very much more nuanced take, can be very critical of Netanyahu, even more so than American media. So that's an interesting thing worth pointing out. Now, of course, this attack comes roughly on the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur or the Ramadan or the October War, depending on who you are and what you call it. So there's a temporal, historical reason for this assault happening now. And there's also a strategic, tactical reason, which is Israel's been racked for 10 months by protests in the streets against the Netanyahu far-right, literally fascist government. I'm not using these terms flippantly. I don't say genocide flippantly. I don't say fascist flippantly. Okay? These are terms I'm saying with my whole fucking chest because they're objectively correct descriptors of what exactly is going on. But you see Israel as divided as it's ever been internally within itself for 10 months, right? And we see that this attack, this decolonial attempt to take back their land, assault on their oppressors, comes precisely at the moment when Israel is deeply divided within itself. That is a strategic, rational thing to do. Okay? Now, decolonization, as Fanon taught us, is a violent affair. And I don't revel in any of the bloodshed. It doesn't make me happy to see any civilians, whether we consider them civilians or not. A lot of these settlers are not civilians. They take up arms. They do settler colonialism at the butt of their own personal guns, right? But certainly, some people somewhere get caught up in the chaos. This is hell. This is war. This is what fucking happens, right? But every single death that has ever happened in the Israel versus Palestine conflict, spanning back to its creation, has been a product, first and foremost, of the Israeli occupation, of the displacement of Palestinians, of the apartheid state. That's the dialectic of conflict. It starts precisely when the people are forcefully and violently separated into oppressed and oppressor, exploited and exploiter. It's at that moment that the conflict flows forward. And everything that happens after that is a direct product of that initial act of oppression. And that is what we need to keep in mind at all times. It's not pretty. Wars are not pretty. Okay? There's no war in which there's no civilian casualties. It doesn't make it right. It's gross. It's terrible. It's horrifying. But civilian casualties is the name of the game in Gaza. Israel consistently, inexorably, in perpetuity, bombs, blows up, destroys Gaza. No ability to fight back. They don't have a military. So what do you want them to do? They're being slaughtered. No accountability. No international courts. Not even so much as a mumbling word of condemnation from the West ever on any of these actions. They can sit there and lob bombs into Gaza. You can have Israeli settlers sit up on a hill, as happened several years ago, I think in 2014, and watch the spectacle of Gazan babies and toddlers and children being blown to smithereens by Israeli bombs as if it's an NFL game. Okay? And you're going to tell me none of those people deserve this? And if you are a parent and you take your children into a fucking settler colonial war zone, right? As a settler, and they get caught up in this conflict and they get hurt, that is a disgusting decision on your part to participate in an unstable, violent settler colonial movement. And you brought your babies into it. How sick can you be? Now, the Palestinians have no choice in Gaza. They're born there. They can't leave there. They're boxed in. Okay? You have a choice. You moved... fucking Netanyahu's born in Philadelphia. Fucking born in Philadelphia. These settlers are born in Europe, in America. They take their families and go over there. Oh, who could have seen this happen? Who could have seen this coming? You put your family in that position. Does that ever justify the killing of a child? No. But in every single war, children die because that's the nature of war. It's fucking chaos. It's bloodshed. And if you hate that, like I hate that, as a father of 3, I don't give a fuck what the religion or race or language of the baby is. It's a baby. And it disgusts me to see any baby hurt or killed, which happens to Palestinians regularly and always has. If you hate that, then your number one fucking political goal, your number one political focus should be on nothing other than ending the occupation, ending the apartheid regime, ending the oppression that gives rise to this disgusting, never-ending parade of fucking tragedy and bloodshed and slaughter. And if that's not your position, if you want to maintain your Zionism, you have to lie. You have to become a fucking piece of shit. You have to become a monster to defend this shit. And this is what happens. This is the direct product of Israeli occupation. All of this. Every baby that's died on both sides is a direct fucking product of the apartheid state, of the occupation, of the brutal oppression of Palestinian people. And what some of these liberals want is to act like and to present themselves as progressive people, but they want oppressed people to remain oppressed. Because it's nicer. It's not so conflicty. Liberals hate conflict. And they can maintain their self-conception as good progressive people without ever having to look at the messy reality of something and pick a fucking side. And that's what it is right now. There's no middle ground. There's no fence sitting. Do you believe in human dignity? Do you believe in freedom? Do you believe in democracy? Do you believe in self-determination? If you answer yes, then you are on the side of Palestine. If you answer no, you're on the side of everything that's anti-human. You're a fascist. You're a genocider. You're a murderer. You're a scumbag. You're subhuman, literally, because you've robbed yourself of your humanity. You've handed over your humanity and said, take this, I'll trade this for my Zionism. Okay, then you've dehumanized yourself. You've dehumanized the other, and you are outside the realm of the human community. You're anti-human. Of course, the U.S. is assisting. You go to work every day, my fellow American listener. The first hour or two of your shift is going to be taxed. Now, the rest of that money is going to be usurped by your employer, and you're going to be given a few fucking quarters and nickels in exchange every hour for your labor. And he's going to take all that product and all that value that you make, and he's going to put it in his own pocket. But for that first that first hour of your shift, you're working for Uncle Sam. You leave your family, you drive in shitty traffic, you go to a job you hate to be exploited. And that first hour of work, you hand over that money to Uncle Sam. And what does he do with it? Does he give you health care? Does he make sure you have housing? Does he build out our infrastructure? Does he bolster our public schools? Does he make sure people can get educated without going into debt? Does he, use that to push policies of a social safety net, making sure that there's no homeless people, helping people, making sure that elderly people and young people don't have to live in tents? No. He takes that money, gives it to neo-Nazis in Ukraine, gives it to genocidal fascists in Israel. So when you get up tomorrow and you go to work, maybe you're listening to this on your way to work, you, by the nature of this disgusting system, are roped into its crimes. You are creating money, by no fault of your own. You're just trying to get by just as I'm trying to get by, my family's trying to get by, we're all trying to get by. Through no fault of our own. Our labor is funding the Ukraine proxy war, and now the genocide, and always has been, but continuing and escalating, the Israeli attempted genocide of Palestinians, particularly in Gaza. There's a huge American warship off the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, making sure no other powers can come into this without wrapping the U.S. in. That's our tax dollars floating out there, making sure that Gazan babies, toddlers, families are slaughtered. Our weapons that we pay for with our tax dollars going to killing babies. Stock prices for weapons manufacturers in the West and in the United States, through the roof. Stonks go up. That line go up. Because blood is being spilled. And whenever there's blood being spilled, there's a capitalist somewhere in the world making money off of it. That's exactly what's happening. We, by virtue of being Americans and simply going to work, are materially assisting this disgusting empire project, which now has two explicit open fronts of war. In the Ukraine, and now in the Levant. What's going to happen? Now, I'm not predicting this, but I will say, world wars have started over less. World wars have started over less. How did World War I start? A Serbian nationalist dusted off Franz Ferdinand, and then all of a sudden, by the inexorable force of the escalating spiral of conflict, dragged in bigger and bigger and bigger powers until it became what we call a world war, which is, of course, in lots of ways, European insanity, European pathology. But nonetheless, world wars have started over much, much less. I'm not saying this is going to be a world war. I would bet money it's going to be a regional war. There's already been some skirmishes on the Lebanese border between Israel and Lebanon. Hezbollah, backed by Iran, centered, I believe, in Lebanon, has stated that they're willing to come to the assistance of Hamas, to come to the assistance of the Palestinians. Saudi Arabia is in an interesting position. Iran is in an interesting position. Big reason America is showing force on the Mediterranean Sea is precisely to try to prevent Iran in particular from getting too uppity. But this almost certainly will become, if it hasn't already, a regional war. The whole world is going to sit back and watch Israel slaughter people for the indefinite future, just murder people, and we're going to see it on our smartphones and on our TVs. And it's going to continue to escalate. What, are people just going to sit back and accept this? Well, some people are. Some people are. A lot of people are cheering on the bloodletting. There are Americans all over this country cheering on like fucking vampires with blood pouring out of their mouths. Like, I just picture these people, these liberal fucking establishment ruling class fucks and all of their little puppets, as like the last scene of Carrie, 1,000,000 Carries soaked in blood at prom, right? Dripping in blood, screaming for more, cheering on Israel as they slice the throat of Palestine, as they slaughter babies and children. Just like those Israeli settlers set up upon their hill and watched Gaza get pummeled in 2014. Western fascist genocidal freaks are sitting up on the proverbial hill of the internet, cheering on and apologizing for and justifying the slaughter of innocents by a much, much richer, stronger, bigger government. You think Russians are big and strong compared to Ukraine. That's nothing compared to the differences between Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, but Palestinians in general, and the Israeli death machine. So there is a hill, and there are people sitting on it, eating their popcorn, soaked in blood, wanting more. And it makes your fucking heart hurt. It makes you feel insane. And it makes you hate this shit. I hate it. I fucking hate it. The point is, this could escalate. We don't know where this is going. We have to do everything we can to educate people, to show out and support wherever there's protests, these big cities like LA and New York, having these huge protests around the world. You won't see that on CNN. Huge uprisings in Yemen, flooding the streets with Palestinian support. Palestine are the good guys. There's never been such clarity on the good guys versus the bad guys since World War II. I don't know. For my audience, every American war is very clear. But universally, people understand World War II, the fight against the Nazi death machine, as a just war. And those were the bad guys. And it is just as clear today that Israel are the bad guys, led by a genocidal, out-and-out fascist freak like Netanyahu and his cabinet of grotesqueries. Slaughtering babies, families, innocent men, women, and children indiscriminately in refugee camps, in apartment buildings as they sleep. That's the hell world that we live in right now. My heart breaks because at the same time that it swells over pride and support of Palestinians fighting back, God damn, with all the odds stacked against them, they fight back. It also breaks because you know who's going to take the brunt of this. And it's not going to end anytime soon. There is a general air pummeling right now. There's the U.S. playing bodyguard off the coast of the Mediterranean. And there's almost certainly going to be a ground invasion on behalf of the IDF going into Gaza. Once they turn much of it to rubble, they'll go in and clear it out. And if you can take the word of Netanyahu seriously and his top advisors seriously, they want to kill everybody. They want to wipe what they call Hamas off the map. They want to wipe Gaza off the map. And they always have. They always have. And this time, they think maybe they have just enough support to make it happen. And it's our job as human beings, not even as communists, not even as socialists, not even as anti-imperialists, as human beings, to stand unapologetically on the side of the Palestinian resistance, unapologetically, against the Israeli genocidal fascist state and against the U.S. genocidal fascist state that takes our labor, turns it into money, and turns that money into blood.